Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. And the movie I want to talk about today comes from 1990. This is The Sheltering Sky, which stars Debra Winger, John Malkovich, directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, from a screenplay by Mark Peplow, which is based on a cult novel from 1949 by Paul Bowles. And in the opening credits, behind the opening credits, we see grainy footage of 1947 Manhattan. But as the film begins, we are in North Africa, and we're following a married couple, Kit, played by Debra Winger, Port, short for Porter, played by John Malkovich, and they are embarking on an adventure to kind of revitalize their marriage, perhaps revitalize their careers as well. Kit is a playwright, and she did have a Broadway play produced, and Port is a composer. So they both have experienced some success, but their marriage seems to be a bit fragile. So we get the sense of trying to both revitalize their marriage and their career. They have a companion, Tunner. He is a rich Long Island socialite. They both of them don't know how he got invited to this trip, because he is a bit of a threat in the sense that he seems to have his eyes on Kit, and Kit is a bit vulnerable as both Kit and Port are sort of reassessing their love, their marriage, and like I say, hoping to revitalize it here in North Africa. And the only other two characters of any note are a older woman played by Jo Bennett with her son played by Timothy Spall, and they are tourists. Port finds out that she writes guidebooks, but she has nothing but contempt for where she is, whereas Kit and Port are fascinated by what they're seeing. There's lots of local color here. One of the attributes of the film is that we really get a sense of where they are. We run through alleyways all the way up to great vistas of an empty desert. And we get the distinction between tourist and traveler. Tunner, it is explained, is a tourist. He's thinking about going back home. The traveler, Kit and Port, they're looking to stay a while, maybe a year, maybe two, as they travel through North Africa. And so we have a picture of a marriage that may or may not be on the rocks. Kit, we get a sense that Kit may be a little bit mentally unstable. She actually says it offhand at one point. Sometimes she feels like she was never meant to be born. And we get a sense of what fate can be and how decisions can determine our fate. Kit hates to make decisions, so she does rely on Port to guide her through her journey in life, and yet she also wonders if that's really a good thing or not. And there's a lot of sex, not a lot, but there's sex in here. Bertolucci from Last Tango On is famous for describing and portraying sexual situations, and we get that here. And somewhat explicitly rendered. I have a feeling there were more scenes that may have been cut out. But as their journey continues, in some sense, they seem to be being gobbled up by their environment. This is alien to them. This is an alien environment. Very few tourists around because of the fact that we're only 2 years after World War II and tourism didn't ramp. It took a while for tourism to ramp up. And it's also very much the story of identity, of who am I? And as the story progresses and incidents occur, we're also given a sense that not only is it a loss of identity, but we get a sense, a very real sense, of loss of self and the loss of love. This is a film, this is a love story. You might not realize it in the beginning, but it is very much a love story. And The screenplay is by Mark Peplow, as I mentioned, and 15 years before this, Peplow wrote a screenplay called The Passenger that Michelangelo Antonioni directed, starring Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider, who was in Last Tango in Paris. And it's a very similar story of identity, of loss of identity. In that story, Nicholson very willingly gives up his identity for another person. So one might say this is, what is being portrayed is sort of a sense of existential despair. So in both these movies, which are very similar in that respect, and some others, because Nicholson originally, the first part of The Passenger is set in the deserts of Africa. And another interesting point in the film is the acting styles. I think John Malkovich is probably one of the great actors of the last 40 years. Superb here, but he's a very technical actor, and he gives every line a very specific reading, whereas Debra Winger is a much more natural actress. She had become an A-list actress through terms of endearment, an officer and a gentleman. And she's quite appealing here, and we really can, if not identify with her plight, we can identify with the turmoil that she goes through here. The last third of this film is probably where the most criticized portion of the film is, whether you accept what happens in the last third of the film or not. When I saw it in 1990 in a movie theater on a big screen, and this is one of those films that really demands to be seen on a big screen, I was overwhelmed by it. And I had read the book. It's one of my favorite novels a couple times before I saw the movie. But I was very anxious to see what Bertolucci would come up with, and I'm not sure whether fans of the book, I guess most of the time it happens, and I'm sure it probably happened with Sheltering Skies, that when you're a fan of the book and you see the movie, you're going to be disappointed. But I was overwhelmed by it. Now, I had seen it a couple times since I read the book again, and at my age, you don't get overwhelmed by movies very often. Certainly not sitting in a living room watching a big screen TV. But I nevertheless was very much moved by this final third of the film, and also Paul Bowles, the novelist, who also lived in North Africa, who had an artistic wife, who wrote a novel that I've read, very good novel, can't remember the name of it. And Bowles wrote some other novels that I haven't read. Sheltering Sky is the only one. But he was a very famous figure in the artistic world of his day. Lived long enough to be in this movie. He's the narrator. You don't actually see him speak, but we hear his words that come right out of the novel. It's sitting in a cafe, and he asks one of the characters in the movie, "Are you lost?" And this applies to the character, but I think it also really applies to the audience at large. Are we lost in life? Are we making the right decisions? I would gather this kind of existential despair, popular in the 1940s for sure. Probably, you could count people who want to see depictions of existential despair on two hands and fingers of two hands nowadays. But I think it still resonates for me. Now, the reception of the film, Roger Ebert, I was on a streak of movies where Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars, but this one he was very negative on this one. He only gave it 2 stars, and he thought it pretentious, and it doesn't even come close to the impact that the novel had. And in his review, he tells you the whole story. I mean, Ebert always did, but I thought by the 1990s he had stopped that. And it's totally immaterial to his review for him to tell you the whole story. So if you're interested in seeing the movie, don't read Ebert's review first. Now, Vincent Canby in the New York Times was highly praises the movie, and probably expresses my own feelings for the film. And And The Sheltering Sky, this is an old DVD, and it's one of these movies that has no Blu-ray in Region A, never had one. And it's really it could really use a 4K UHD restoration, because these are, this is an absolutely beautiful film, and especially as you can imagine from the cover here, in that final third of the film, we get the David Lean Lawrence Arabia kind of pictorial beauty, and there's some great shots of camels from a distance, camels going, a whole line of camels going through a desert landscape that are quite beautiful. But even the scenes in the towns and villages that Kit and Port visit, they also are just, he catches all that local color that I described so vividly, so you as the viewer can actually feel you're in that kind of claustrophobic, that kind of fish out of water feeling, while also being quite mesmerized by what you are seeing. So the controversial movie, this was Bertolucci's follow-up to The Last Emperor, which is the great, commercial, or at least critical achievement of his career, when that movie nominated for 8 or 9 Academy Awards, won all of them, including Best Picture and Best Director. So this was considered a come down, and I think a lot of the reviews after the movies that come after your big Oscar winner are generally going to be are going to be looked differently. You're going to be the critics are going to be much tougher. This is a beautiful film. It moves me deeply. I also recommend, for those of you who like to read novels, the novel that this film was based on, because it is as hypnotic to me, probably more hypnotic than the movie itself. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.